Pat Foley is a legend. This was the final game legendary Hawks play-by-play announcer Pat Foley will be calling after 40 years with the team and will be retiring after the end of the year. Pat has been calling Hawks games long before I was born. And to see him go, it's kind of the end of an era for Chicago. As more things that this season is signaling the end of an era. These past couple of years, this is another domino to fall. Pat Foley will end his career right here against the Sharks. The dynamic duo of Pat Foley and Eddie Olczyk, who is a fantastic analyst. The fact that he is the one who is doing our games feels that much more special. It makes every game feel like it means more because he was with Doc Emmerich and they would do the top games every year on national TV, and he's now with Kenny Albert and TNT doing the same thing. But we're not here to talk about Edzo. We're here to talk about Pat because his legacy is going to live on for a long time when you talk about the history of the Chicago Blackhawks. As when you even think about going back to the early 80s and highlights from there, you're still going to be hearing Pat Foley's voice. And he called the cup runs in the early 90s, or the cup run in 92, that success in the 90s. And even in the 80s, they had some conference final appearances, but they could not get past the juggernaut Oilers of the time. And so, Pat Foley has been around for a long time. The really only slumps that he'd been around for was the early mid 2000s and this slump right here. It's a shame he goes out on a tough season, but this was announced prior to the season beginning, so we all knew this day was coming. But he decided that this was going to be his last game that he was going to call. And as I tuned in the third period, I knew with the Hawks leading, they had to win this game for Pat Foley. They had to win this game. If they were not going to win any other legacy night, they have to win for Pat. You get one opportunity to send your play-by-play announcer for 40 years out with a W. And that's what they did. They sent Pat Foley off with a W. I'll talk about the game in a minute. I'm stand up in a minute, but I wanted to take some time early in this video to honor Pat Foley for the amazing job that he's done calling Hawks games for as long as I can remember. Is the voice of some of these playoff runs. Him and our radio announcer, I believe his name's Troy Murray, and I think, I'm not 100% sure what the update was, but I believe he was in cancer treatment or still is in cancer treatment, and so hoping all the best for him as well. Those two guys were the voices of this early to mid 2010s dynasty. And all I wanted to do with this little segment here at the beginning is to say thank you to Pat Foley. For 40 years, you call one team for 40 years, you know more about that team than anyone else ever. Because you're there for virtually every single game, calling every play for about 40 years. That's special. That's special. Pat's been calling Hawks games since the Islanders dynasty. That's how long. You thought the Islanders dynasty was old. That's how long Pat Foley's been calling Hawks games. He basically came into the league right when the merger with WHA came. So the Oilers, the Whalers, Nordiques, and the Jets came into the league. And then right after, the Atlanta Flames would move up to Calgary. And so he's been around since then, since before Gretzky. Or maybe Gretzky was in the league. I don't know. But, before Gretzky became Wayne Gretzky. So that's how long he's been doing it. And, he's not the longest tenured broadcaster, not even the longest tenured broadcaster that's retiring this year. Rick Jeanneret of the Buffalo Sabres, who has been calling them since their inception in 1970, 71, one of those 2 years, is retiring after this season. And so, we have two legendary broadcasters retiring in the same year. As an aspiring broadcaster, the dedication that broadcasters show, especially regional broadcasters, the dedication and the passion that they show toward the team that they are calling is something special. And the ones that are the best and the most memorable regional commentators are the ones who define moments in franchise histories. They define moments and they stick around, and you build a relationship with these commentators. It feels as if you build a relationship, which some regional commentators you can't necessarily say the same for. Now, it is partially because they haven't been there for as long. But when you're there for 40 years, you start to build a relationship with the audience and especially in a big market like Chicago, you're going to be creating a relationship with the majority of the fan base that, wants to watch every game. And so this game was a tribute to Pat Foley. A big win for the Hawks over the Sharks. Both of these teams were pretty dang good in the early mid-2010s. And the San Jose Sharks were good throughout the entire decade. Only recently, in the last year or two, have they faltered off. But now I think it's time to recap the game in a pretty quick fashion. Hawks came into this game having lost their last 8 games. They have not won a game since they played the Kings on the road. And they are, again, this is what got them out of playoff contention. And they're threatening to overtake the first 10-game skid for longest losing streak of the season, which is embarrassing in its own right. And we would see Patrick Kane score first for the Hawks, followed by a goal by Timo Meier. That would make it 1-1 after the first period. And, well, the Sharks are fighting for their playoff lives right now, as a loss here would eliminate them from playoff contention. Taylor Radish would score in the second, which he's played very well for the Hawks here at the tail end of the season, and I'm excited to see what he can do next season for the Hawks if he decides to stick around, because I don't remember how many goals he had with Tampa, but I think he's gotten more with Chicago in a month than he did with Tampa in like 4 or 5 months. Sharks would then tie up, and Calvin DeHaan would score his 4th goal of the season and get the Hawks back in front 3-2 at the end of the second. Dylan Strom would add another insurance goal before 2 in the third, before the Sharks would get a goal from Balsers, and then Jacob Megna, I believe is the name, just his 2nd goal of the season, would tie the game with under 5 minutes to go, and we would be going to overtime. And at this point, I'm thinking, okay, I would have loved to see them go out with a regulation win, but an overtime win would be awesome for Pat Foley to call one more goal, that being an overtime. But nothing comes from the overtime, and we would go to a shootout. The first 2 rounds would have nothing happen, no goals. So that brings up Alex DeBrincat in the 3rd round of the shootout. And he would score here, and a sigh of relief would go throughout the entire stadium and anyone who was watching the game, as there was one more shooter for San Jose to try and tie this game and force some more shootout rounds. That shooter would be Erik Karlsson, and he would move in on Lankinen and would not score. And for one final time, Pat Foley gives a patented Hawks win! Hawks win! And he would be the first star of the game. They would, announce the 3 stars, and to his surprise, he'd be dubbed as the #1 star of the game. And he would have a nice speech, about the season, his time with the Hawks, and give one final send-off with the entire team still out on the ice, paying their tributes to the great Pat Foley. Now, throughout the third period, Pat Foley would be giving out some thank yous and appreciation notes, just some, final words that he wanted to say on the broadcast. He would deliver on that front and would go out and go into retirement happy with a Hawks win. Seeing him walk out of the booth there was it did signal the end of an era. It really did. It's just going to be kind of weird. They announced a little bit ago that Chris Foster's would be taking over as Pat Foley's successor, and I think he'll do a fine job. But I will say it is going to be a bit different for the first year or two without Pat Foley. And I think Chris will do a fantastic job. I think he'll do a fine job. It's just always difficult to follow up a legend. So he's got a tough task, and I think he'll do a fine job. But who knows, maybe he could also create a career of his own. But for him to do that, the Hawks would need to make it back to the postseason. So it may take a little bit for him to start building his legacy. But I have trust in Chris Foster's and hope that everything goes well for Pat Foley in retirement and going forward, hoping that the Hawks can just continue to just not suck, just not go any lower, because this was a much-needed win. It eliminated the Sharks from playoff contention. So the Hawks actually did not only send off Pat Foley with a W, they sent the Sharks packing and would tell them, hey, you're going to be joining us on the couch for the playoffs. The Hawks were already out, and they dragged the Sharks down with them and sent Pat Foley into retirement with one final Hawks victory. A broadcasting legend for regional broadcasting, and I only wish the best for him in retirement. In this 5-game homestand, they had played terrible. They lost in overtime to the Coyotes to start. They got shut out by the Kraken, lost to Dallas, lost to LA. And in the final game of this 5-game homestand, they took out San Jose in a much-needed victory, broke an 8-game skid. A lot of things that went right in this game for the Hawks. And it feels like it's been 3 weeks since we talked about a Hawks win, because honestly, it's probably been that long since the Hawks have won. But they get the W, and now they got Nashville. Got Nashville on the road. They win a game, and you're like, okay, maybe they can spoil some stuff. And now they got Nashville next, and then they have Calgary after that. After that game's been rescheduled. Oh man. Well, at least we had this night that we can celebrate the career and legacy of Pat Foley and just celebrate a Hawks win. So yeah, pretty sentimental video here as Pat Foley now moves on into the next chapter of his life, into retirement. And while the Hawks organization will move on as they lose yet another piece to the organization, has been so dearly beloved. Unlike some other pieces in the organization that have left this season, I'll let you fill in what you want. But Pat Foley was a beloved member of this organization, and the fans loved him. Everyone appreciated him, loved listening to the games with him, and experiencing the ride of a full season with Pat Foley. But that will change this season as Chris Foster will take over, and we enter a new chapter into the Hawks legacy. So that is going to conclude this video. If you liked it, please hit the like button. I'd appreciate it. That'd be pretty fun. And yeah, hit that subscribe button too. That's also pretty fun. You can hit it for free now. I mean, you could always have, but you know, it's still free. You can totally just hit it. That's pretty fun. That'd be fun. And yeah, I got nothing else. Thank you, Pat Foley, once again. And I will see you guys in the next one. Take care, everyone.